Yes, some empires fall because they are weak, but this one fell because it was invincible. Imagine a power so great even its enemies believed it would never die, yet it crumbled from within. History remembers many empires, but only a few collapsed under the weight of their own grief. It wasn't an invasion, a war, or a plague that destroyed it. Its own power did. Now, they built monuments to eternity, but eternity had other plans. There are moments in history when the rise of an empire feels almost supernatural, as if the world itself steps aside to let greatness pass. You can feel it in the stones of its roads, in the steel of its soldiers, in the quiet confidence of its rulers. An empire at its peak does not walk. It stalks across continents with the certainty of a force chosen by destiny. Every victory whispers that the future belongs to them. Every conquest tells them they are unbreakable. But history has a rhythm of its own. And when it watches an empire climb too high, too fast, it begins to wonder how far that empire will fall. Tonight we journey into the heart of one such colossus. A kingdom so mighty its shadow covered half the world. A civilization so advanced, so unstoppable, that its people believed even the gods envied them. But strength can be deceiving, and power, when stretched beyond wisdom, becomes the very weapon that turns inward. This is the story of an empire that rose like thunder and collapsed like a whisper, not because it was weak, but because it was too powerful to survive. Empires do not begin with fanfare. They begin with hunger. Hunger for land, hunger for glory, hunger for a name the world will never forget. And so it was with this empire. In its early days, it was nothing more than a collection of tribes, villages, or soldiers stitched together by ambition. But ambition has a way of catching fire, and soon the flames spread. Every battle they fought, they won. Every obstacle that rose, they broke. Their enemies didn't just fear them, they expected to lose against them. As their banners multiplied across the horizon, something powerful awakened in their hearts. Belief. Belief that they were destined to dominate the earth. Belief that the world was theirs to shape, to rule, to command. And belief is the most dangerous weapon an empire can wield. Their armies marched like living machines, disciplined, relentless, precise. Their leaders spoke with voices that could move nations. Their engineers carved roads across deserts, mountains, rivers, as if geography itself had bowed in surrender. Cities rose in places where only wilderness existed before. Markets overflowed with wealth pulled from conquered land. Gold, spices, silks, everything flowed toward the imperial heart like blood rushing into a growing titan. At their peak, they became more than conquerors. They became a myth, a force of nature, a statement to the world. We are unstoppable. But power is never content. The more they gained, the more they reached. Territory stretched farther than their armies could march, farther than their rulers could govern, farther than their laws could travel. Yet still they expanded, convinced that momentum itself was a guarantee of immortality. This was the fatal illusion, the belief that size equals strength, that dominance equals stability, that victory equals wisdom. The truth is far simpler. Every empire has a breaking point, and the greater the rise, the more violent. As this empire surged beyond the limits of strategy, beyond the limits of reason, it began to carry a burden it could not see, the burden of its own greatness. Every new conquest added more land to defend. Every victory added more enemies who waited patiently for their chance. Every triumph stretched the empire thinner and thinner and thinner. What the world saw as unstoppable power was, in reality, a giant balancing on a blade. And giants always fall the hardest. They believed their rise was eternal. History was already sharpening the knife. Power is a strange companion. At first it stands beside you. You, steady, loyal, lifting your steps with promise. But as it grows, it begins to whisper. It whispers that you are invincible, that you're invincible, that your judgment is flawless, that the world exists because you allow it. And those whispers, soft as they may be, can turn even the wisest ruler into a prisoner of their own triumph. So it happened with this empire. In the early days, its leaders were forged from hardship, warriors who had known fear, hunger, and loss. Their strength came from struggle. Their humility came from survival. But as victories piled upon victories, a new type of ruler emerged. Leaders who had never seen the mud of the battlefield, only the marble of the palace. Leaders who inherited power instead of earning it. Leaders who mistook the silence of their subjects for loyalty and the bowed heads of their enemies for eternal submission. They no longer walked among their people. They floated above them. Surrounded by wealth, guarded by armies, praised by sycophants, these rulers began to believe something dangerous, that the empire's greatness was permanent, that their decisions were beyond questioning, that they themselves were not just rulers, but destiny personified. Arrogance took root. Silent, invisible, deadly, the empire's halls, once filled with debate and strategy, now echoed with flattery. Advisors stopped offering truth and began offering comfort. Problems were hidden beneath silk and gold. Corruption moved like a shadow through the administration, unnoticed by those who no longer wished to see. With every year that passed, the empire's leaders drifted farther from reality. They issued grand proclamations that had no grounding in the world their soldiers fought in. They spent wealth as if it were infinite. They entered wars with the confidence of gods and the wisdom of children. Their reach extended beyond logic, beyond caution, beyond the limits of any single realm. And while they basked in the glow of their own power, cracks spread across the foundations they thought unbreakable. Farmers struggled under impossible taxes. Soldiers fought battles that no longer made sense. Governors built little kingdoms of corruption inside the larger kingdom of lies. And the citizens who had once celebrated their empire's rise now whispered doubts in the night. But the rulers heard none of it. They lived behind walls too thick for truth to penetrate. Power had not just blinded them, it had deafened them. In their halls of marble, they celebrated festivals while borders collapsed. They held feasts while the treasury emptied. They built monuments while their provinces burned. And each time a warning reached them, from a general, a senator, a messenger who risked everything, they brushed it aside with the arrogance of those who believed themselves untouchable. Impossible, they said. We are the greatest empire the world has ever seen. And that was exactly the problem. For when leaders believe their empire is eternal, they stop protecting it. When rulers believe their power is flawless, they stop questioning their choices. And when the ones at the top forget fear, their people are the first to suffer for it. The empire didn't collapse because its enemies grew stronger. It collapsed because its leaders grew blind. Blind to corruption, blind to warning, blind to the truth that no power, not even theirs, lasts forever. History has shown this again and again. Nothing destroys a mighty empire as efficiently as its own arrogance. From a distance, an empire at its peak gleams like polished gold, but gold has a weakness. It can hide the rot beneath. While the world saw shining monuments, towering walls, and cities bursting with life, something quieter, something far more dangerous, had begun to grow in the shadows. Not in sudden explosions or dramatic betrayals, but in small fractures, hairline cracks spreading through the foundation of greatness. This is how empires truly begin to fall. Not with screams, but with whispers. At the heart of the empire, the economy, once a roaring engine, began to stutter. The endless wars that had once brought wealth now drained it. Conquests used to pay for themselves, fill in the treasury with spoils and slaves. But the empire had run out of easy victories. Now every new campaign cost more than it returned. Fields were left untended as farmers were forced into military service. Trade slowed, markets emptied. And slowly, coin by coin, the empire began to bleed. Taxes rose like a tide no one could escape. The poor cursed, the merchants worried. Even the wealthy felt the sting. But instead of facing these problems, the rulers buried them under new layers of luxury, hoping the glitter would hide the decay. And for a while, it did. Yet decay spreads. Far from the palaces, out on the fringes where the empire touched the wilderness, its borders trembled. The walls were high, but the soldiers guarding them were tired. Their armor was dented, their pay was late. Their loyalty, once iron, had begun to rust. Some deserted, others sold secrets to the highest bid. And enemies who had once trembled at the empire's name now tested its defenses, pressing harder, pushing farther. Every raid, every breach was another reminder. The giant was losing its footing. Inside the empire, politics grew poisonous. Senators schemed. Generals plotted. Governors became kings in all but name. Each faction fought for itself, not for the empire. Unity, the force that had once driven their rise, crumbled into dust. And then there was the people. The citizens who had once cheered the empire's victories now murmured with bitterness. Their faith cracked, their pride fractured. They saw the corruption. They felt the hunger. They knew the truth long before the rulers ever did. The empire was sick, and no one wanted to hear it. The streets that once sang with celebration now echoed with unrest. food riots, rebellions, protests. Voices that had once praised now demanded change, but in a system built on power, change is the one thing rulers fear most, and so they ignored it. The cracks widened. Meanwhile, nature played its part. Droughts came, famine followed. A plague swept through crowded cities, thinning the population and darkening the empire's spirit. An empire can survive enemies, it can survive invasions, it can even survive a tyrant or two. But it cannot survive every problem at once, and that is what happened here. Economic strain, political chaos, border pressure, civil unrest, natural disaster, each one a small crack, each one ignorable on its own. But together they formed a fracture no amount of power could mend. The empire still looked magnificent from afar, glowing under the sun, standing tall and old victories. But anyone who stepped closer, anyone who listened carefully, could hear the truth. The stone was splitting. The foundation was hollow. The great machine that once dominated the world was grinding to a halt. Empires don't collapse when they are weak. They collapse when they pretend they're still strong. And this empire was pretending with all its might. Every empire believes it will endure forever, until one day it doesn't. Collapse never arrives as a polite guest. It comes like a storm, sudden to the eye, yet years in the making. And for this empire, the storm began with a single spark. No one knew it at the time. History rarely announces its turning points with trumpet and drum. Instead, they slip into the world quietly. A border village raided, a governor murdered, general who refuses to obey orders. Small things, simple things, things an empire at its height could crush with ease. But when the foundations have already cracked, even a whisper can shatter a kingdom. The moment came on a cold morning when an enemy the empire had long dismissed as primitive launched an attack, not on the borders but deep into the heart of its territory. They moved with a boldness that stunned the empire's commanders. Years of corruption had hollowed the army, years of arrogance had blinded its rulers, and years of unrest had drained its spirit. What once would have been a minor skirmish now ignited a wildfire. The empire scrambled to respond, but its armies were scattered across distant, unnecessary wars. Its generals hated each other more than they hated the enemy. Messages were delayed. Orders contradicted each other. Soldiers fought without direction. And as the chaos spread, something ancient and powerful broke inside the empire. Fear. Fear rolled through its streets like smoke from a burning city. Fear that the mighty were no longer mighty. Fear that the walls, the armies, the rulers, all of it had grown fragile. Enemies sensed the weakness. They gathered like wolves around a wounded giant. One invasion became two became five. And soon the empire faced threats from every direction. What followed was not a single battle, but a cascade, one disaster tumbling into the next. A fortress fell in the east. A rebellion erupted in the south. A trusted general betrayed the crown and declared himself the rightful ruler. Civil war erupted, carving the empire into pieces as sharp as broken glass. Brothers killed brothers, cities burned, and the treasury once overflowing with gold ran dry. In desperation, the rulers attempted to rally their people, but their voices held no weight. They had ignored their citizens for too long. They had silenced their warnings, dismissed their suffering, praised victories that never came. And when a leader loses trust, he loses the empire long before the walls fall. The final blow did not come from the mightiest enemy, but from the simplest truth. There were no more resources left to fight. Armies deserted, provinces surrendered, allies turned their backs. The capital, once the shining heart of the known world, waited as flames approached its gates. The enemy marched in not with fear, but with the quiet awe of those who had conquered the unthinkable. The streets fell silent. Statues of past heroes cast long shadows as if ashamed. And in the high palace where rulers once believed themselves gods, the throne stood empty, abandoned long before the enemy arrived. The empire did not fall in a grand duel or a heroic last stand. It simply succumbed, collapsed under the weight of its own contradictions, crumbled because its greatness had grown too heavy to carry. In its final hours, there was no thunder, no quake, no divine final act. Just a tired kingdom exhaling its last. And so the empire that once reshaped the world was itself reshaped by the quiet truth history whispers to all who rise too high. Nothing is too powerful to fall, not even the might. When an empire falls, the dust does not settle quickly. It hangs in the air, silent, heavy, drifting across centuries like a warning carried by the wind. For long after the last stone has crumbled, long after the banners have faded and the armies have disappeared into the pages of forgotten chronicles, one truth remains. The greatest tragedies in history are not the empires that died, but the lessons humanity refused to learn from them. The ruins of this once mighty realm stood for generations, a reminder etched into the very bones of the earth. Travelers walked through its shattered halls. Scholars traced the inscriptions on broken monuments. Children asked their elders how something so powerful could vanish so completely. And the answer was always the same. No empire falls in a day, it falls every day, long before its final moment. As the centuries passed, thinkers, poets, and prophets studied the rise and collapse of this colossal kingdom. They searched for wisdom in the ashes, hoping to understand what the rulers themselves had ignored. What they found was not a story of defeat, but a mirror, a reflection of every society that ever dared to believe it was untouchable. The lesson was simple, painfully simple. Strength without humility becomes arrogance. Growth without balance becomes burden. Power without wisdom becomes poison. And any nation, no matter how vast, no matter how feared, no matter how glorious, will collapse under the weight of its own unchecked ambition. In the ruins, the message was carved as clearly as if the stones themselves were speaking. Do not mistake size for stability. Do not mistake victory for virtue. Do not mistake dominance for destiny. For destiny favors those who understand their limits, not those who pretend they don't have any. Generations later, new empires rose. New rulers built palaces where old ones had crumbled. New armies marched where ancient legions once fell. And as always, the cycle repeated. Confidence grew, borders expanded, wealth poured in, and leaders once again began to believe the same dangerous myth, that their power was eternal. But the ruins still whispered, to anyone wise enough to listen. They whispered of the farmers who starved while the palace feasted, of the soldiers who died for wars no one could explain, of the rulers who drowned in their own pride, of the people who lost faith long before the walls fell, of the day the empire collapsed not from invasion, but from exhaustion. For the greatest empires don't die because they are conquered. They die because they forget why they rose in the first place. And so the lesson lives on. Honor your people, respect your limits, recognize your faults, and remember that power is a guest, not a companion. When a nation treats power as a throne, it becomes blind. When it treats power as a responsibility, it becomes strong. The past leaves behind echoes for a reason. It warns us, guides us, protects us from repeating the same mistakes that once shattered worlds. But the question, the eternal question, remains, will we listen? Or will we follow the same path, rising higher and higher until the sky itself refuses to hold us? For history has no favorites. It does not worship the mighty. It does not spare the powerful. It simply watches and waits. And when the lesson is ignored, the fall is inevitable. That is the legacy of the empire that was too powerful to survive. A monument not to its greatness, but to its warning.